you seem to have conviction that there is kind of off the books and in the black science.
This is a potential avenue into accessing different forms of energy at a huge scale that would potentially provide an explanation for the kind of technology and performance and physics that UAP seem to exhibit. It's pretty well documented that the Nazis had this attraction to the occult that led them to investigate all sorts of odd things. It's really fascinating to me that the Nazi scientists were working on has some superficial similarities to the kind of hypotheses and declarations that Dr. Salvatore Pais has put out, that they used sort of these rotating cylinders filled with a form of mercury. And of course, that's what Witkowski says that the Nazi Bell program was doing, that was producing these levitation effects.
I'm here with the esteemed Kirk McConnell. I'm so excited to have you because I think you are as close to the action as anybody when it comes to the civilian representative world. You were on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and you have spoken to firsthand witnesses and a lot of people where that probably give you confidence that the whole UFO thing is very real, where people on the outside, just don't have kind of the same data points. And so I'm really just honored to speak to you now. And you did that for multiple decades. And, I think it came about your understanding of the UAP issue kind of very, very honestly and organically. And so, it's an honor to have you. Thank you.
Well, I very much appreciate it, Jesse. I would say that you're exactly right. When I first started into this, looking at this phenomenon, it was shortly after Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal's seminal New York Times article in late 2017, and that's a starting place for many people who, prior to that, were not paying any attention to the UFO, UAP phenomenon, and that was true for me and for several of my colleagues on the Senate's committee staffs, both the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee. That started us down this road. Yeah.
And so you're, attached to Senator Jack Reed, is that right? From
I was.
Rhode Island.
I've retired. I retired about a year, almost exactly a year ago.
But you have this kind of conventional career in politics, right? And then how do you get into UFOs, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, as I say, it was that New York Times piece where they had some very specific and what you would say actionable information in there about specific events that were ongoing at the time. Some like the Nimitz case from 2004, which was historical. They reported on the OSAP ATIP program and so forth. So we had strings to pull, and that's what we started to do. And, just sort of following what we thought was reasonable evidence, we've been doing it ever since.
So 2017, Leslie Kean, New York Times journalist, writes this kind of bombshell article.
Mm-hmm.
We've now found out that, Chris Mell and Lou Elizondo had a big part in the article. They came to her with these 3 videos that formerly were not acknowledged to be real by the Pentagon Office of Naval Intelligence.
Right.
It was the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and the Gimbal video. This all comes out along with the revelation that Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader on the Democratic side and representative in Nevada, senator from Nevada, had funded $22 million along with, I think, Daniel Inouye and Ted Stevens of Alaska, to actually study UFOs in an official context. And so it's this kind of bombshell article. And what happens next for you? So you read the article, you say, oh, maybe there's something here. And then what happens?
Well, I can't recall the specific one step at a time, but generally speaking, I had known Chris Mellon actually since the late 1980s when I first started working in the Senate. He was a staffer for at the time Senator Bill Cohen from Maine on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So I'd known Chris forever. I saw his name associated with this, and it was easy to reconnect with Chris, and we met Lou, and we met Dr. Putoff and Dr. Davis, and we met the other folks who had been working on the ranch in Utah, and we met
This
Brandon
is
Fugel,
Skinwalker Ranch.
Skinwalker Ranch. We interviewed Navy pilots, a succession of them. We also found Dave Fravor and Alex Dietrich, who had been pilots in the Tic Tac episode back in 2004. We met with people from the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and the Navy and so on. So we were covering a lot of ground in a relatively short order. And there was a lot of interest on the part of members at the time in understanding what the Navy was experiencing off the east coast of the United States.
Now, there is a big gap between, okay, we had, an anomalous sighting at Nimitz in 2004. We studied this stuff on the order of $22 million at Skinwalker Ranch from 2007 to 2012. And, the government has some knowledge of this stuff. There's a big gap between that and the David Grusch claims that probably, and this is me kind of extrapolating, but like billions of dollars have been spent on this issue. That we have, biologics and non-human propulsed craft in our possession at various kind of aerospace warehouses. He's offered to give the addresses for the warehouses. So there's a big delta between we have this kind of ephemeral interest, and then we have this systematic study that's been going on for many decades. Do you have conviction in the latter, in the kind of the David Grusch account?
Yes, it was gradual in coming, but once there was what I would call staff level and member driven investigation. We were beating the bushes and hoping that other sources would come forward, and the folks that we were dealing with already, who had obvious and publicized experience and expertise, going back to the OSAP ATIP days that Harry Reid was sponsoring. And this led to other people, coming to Congress and telling their stories, which were, riveting and credible. These are people with high-level clearances, positions of authority in the intelligence community and the Defense Department, and no reason to be fabricating things. So and you start reading and reading and reading about this. There's just, as you know, mountains of information out there. Not all of it true, but it's not all false. That's for sure. And we ended up coming progressively to the conclusion that there's not just smoke here. There's fire. Yeah.
And you're one of the few people, because we've had some conversations offline, you're one of the few people that I think is fairly deep on the nuts and bolts tracing the history of the legacy UFO program, as well as the science. And so you seem to have conviction that there is kind of off the books and in the black science that, the civilian world doesn't really have access to, which if you were to tell this to the average citizen in the US, they'd be shocked. Science is supposed to be sort of, open source. Obviously, you have nuclear trade secrets, but nuclear physics is open source. And so if you analogize that with the UAP issue, there are probably UAP trade secrets that, involve national security, but UAP physics, so to speak, should be sort of open source to the extent we understand how any of these things work from, an energy perspective, propulsion perspective. Do you think we've made progress along those vectors and that's hidden from the public? Are you still lugging around one of those bulky, worn-out wallets?
I am.
Your posture's not great due to that wallet.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
I'm currently now more self-aware of my posture.
It might be time for an upgrade.
Oh, what do you suggest?
My personal suggestion is Ridge Wallet. Look at this sleek design. Do you see it?
Oh, wow. So sleek.
Yeah. Pretty sleek. This thing holds up to 12 cards plus cash.
All in a slim, durable, and stylish package, too.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Ridge wallets feature RFID blocking technology, so digital pickpockets won't stand a chance. Plus, with their AirTag attachment, you'll never lose your wallet again. Where'd it go?
I lost my wallet.
Where'd it go?
I was just checking my AirTag. Easy.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I was recently in the Colorado mountains, and if I had lost my Ridge wallet, I would have no problem tracking it down, even in the Rockies. Right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. So get up to 40% off at ridge.com/cosmic. Just head to ridge.com/cosmic to see their biggest sale of the year. After you purchase, they will ask about where you heard about them. Where did they hear about Ridge Wallet, Chris?
They heard it here first on American Alchemy.
Yeah.
Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Upgrade your wallet. Thank me later.
It's a personal opinion, but my tentative conclusion is that we have made progress. I can't prove it, and there's certainly a lot of credible reporting on both sides that the government has not made progress. So I don't want to overstate this. In fact, as you know, we frequently hear the argument in favor of disclosure being that the government has failed to make progress because of the severe levels of secrecy imposed on the program and the decentralized and stovepipe siloed nature of the different activities that are going on, the inability to attract and work with the nation's premier scientific minds, the lack of coordination and integration across these silos. It's easy to understand. It's plausible that those factors could have retarded or inhibited progress in a very significant way. And the idea being that disclosure and bringing this under appropriate congressional and, for that matter, executive branch oversight and management may significantly improve our ability to understand the physics and to master it. I do personally believe that we know an awful lot more about this than the government has let on. Yeah.
Are there any specific kind of modes of exotic science? So, like, you hear things like an extended version of electrodynamics. So, like, from classical electrodynamics to extended electrodynamics, you hear things like the 0 point has energy and we can tap the 0 point. Or, I made a piece about the mid-century inventor Townsend Brown, which my audience, has heard from me about this guy ad nauseum, because I think he made some interesting updates in the world of kind of gravity manipulation. Have you looked into any of those things specifically?
Yes, Jesse, I certainly have tried to do that. I've tried to be a genuine student of this issue and have read as much as I could find time. And I've certainly read the biographies of Thomas Townsend Brown. I've tried to read about Nikola Tesla, who I think also, with using different terms, but I believe that he discovered what you're referring to as extended electrodynamics, which is the modern term for these non-traditional, so-called Hertzian transverse electromagnetic waves. And, Tesla certainly believed that he had discovered, I don't know if they should properly be called electromagnetic waves, because the electric and magnetic fields are sort of suppressed in these notions of scalar longitudinal waves. But For convenience, I'll just refer to them as that. Tesla, certainly, he was dismayed when Hertz came out with his version of electromagnetic waves and said, "This is the
Is that
this
true?
is the answer."
That's really interesting. I didn't know that
Oh
Tesla was
yeah,
dismayed
he
about
was, and
Hertz's.
at least from what I've read, he actually traveled to Europe
Really?
to meet with Hertz to
Wow.
try to convince him that he was wrong.
No way.
Way.
That's fascinating. So tell me if I'm getting the history right. I think in 1865, James Clerk Maxwell, British physicist, came up with his kind of equations around electromagnetism, but we hadn't actually detected an electromagnetic wave. And then Heinrich Hertz,
Right.
I think 1887-ish,
It's about that.
that time.
Uh-huh.
And so Tesla would have been very young, but alive then,
And
I believe.
active, and had already believed that he had accomplished a lot and learned a lot about this phenomenon.
And so he goes to meet with Hertz
Yeah,
because he felt like his electromagnetic models were limited.
that's right, and that he did not have it right, and that Tesla was trying to help him correct his beliefs, and by saying, no, look, this is I have a different kind of wave here, and I think we call it Tesla waves over the decades. I mean, it's been well over 100 years. What, 140 years now,
Right.
something like that. Anyway, so I think Tesla, after all, famously believed that he could transmit electricity wirelessly, and worked very hard on that for a big chunk of his life. And frankly, there are accounts that suggest that, or not suggest, that state that Tesla believed that he was even able to achieve so-called over unity. He would send out electrical power wirelessly, and he believed that under certain conditions that he would receive more energy than he transmitted, and to him this was the ether.
Mhm.
Not exactly the ether of the early and mid and 19th century, but nonetheless, that's what, as I recall, that's what he thought it was,
Mhm.
that he was extracting energy. Today, I think we would say that he believed, at least, that he was extracting energy from the physical vacuum,
Yeah.
from the zero-point energy field.
Well, he definitely believed that, and I believe he dedicated a lot of the end of his life towards working towards that end from an engineering perspective, and received funding from J.P. Morgan to work on this stuff at Wardenclyffe, and it was all about wireless energy transmission, presumably through the vacuum.
Yeah.
It's very, very fascinating history. Then he dies, I think in like the 30s or so.
No, I think it was 43.
43. There you go.
Yeah.
And he was living at the New Yorker Hotel.
I forget the name of the hotel, but
I think it was the New Yorker Hotel. I think he lived in, was it 327? He had an obsession with 3, and it was right next to Bryant Park, and he was in love with a pigeon at Bryant Park. Anyways, he dies, and all of his work gets confiscated by the FBI.
Yeah, I don't think all of it did, Jesse.
Okay.
And look, I don't claim or pretend to be a deep student of Nikola Tesla's life, and it's very complex in a lot of different accounts. But he had I think a nephew who was very interested in his papers. The FBI, various accounts say that, yes, the FBI came in and seized large numbers of his files and classified them. But there's also, stories about Tesla also shopping some of his work and beliefs with Russian sources or Soviet sources, and with the Germans.
I think he did do that, and I think he felt, and he sort of regretted it at the end of his life.
I hope so. Yeah.
Right. Because he was Serbian. So that's really interesting. But the two aren't mutually exclusive, right?
No,
That
no,
we
they're
could have
not.
confiscated his
Sure.
files, and he also could have shared his work with the Germans and the Soviets as well.
That's right. Now, I do want to stress, Jesse, that my science friends in the UAP field, like Dr. Harold Puthoff and Eric Davis, I'm sure if they're watching this, they're very upset with me because I don't think they believe that that Tesla nor Thomas Townsend Brown or others like them, less well known to be sure, actually achieved the things that we're alluding to. In other words, sort of a access to this vast energy in the 0 point energy field in the so-called physical vacuum. They really don't think that that has been achieved, and they doubt that it's possible. And they're scientists and eminent ones, and I am not. I just, like you, read these accounts, and they're very interesting to me.
But Hal Puthoff also did a podcast with the National Science Foundation, and I think it was co-sponsored by NASA, where he talks about a model of extended electrodynamics. And he even talks about a specific experiment involving a traditional electromagnetic wave or RF signal. And then you take two Faraday chambers, one to kill the E field, the electric field, one to kill the magnetic field.
Right.
And you can communicate essentially kind of faster than light. And so via these vector and scalar potentials. So, do you think that has no connection with the Tesla stuff, or maybe that's what he's saying? I don't know.
Look, I'm no scientist, but I do think that this may be an example that you're bringing up of like, for lay people, it would be like, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? A distinction without a difference. It's like, okay, yeah, Hal believes in a certain brand of extended electrodynamics. But not this part of it, maybe.
Sure.
Whereas others believe in, for example, scalar longitudinal waves. Hal and Eric might say, "Gee, I don't believe that." Whereas other scientists, and in fact, Lee Hively, who is a dominant force and figure in extended electrodynamics, would say that that they are likely real.
Have you met Lee Hively?
I have not met Lee Hively. I have certainly met people that work directly with him.
So this guy is known as kind of the godfather of extended electrodynamics, like in the modern context. And I think he's published with a guy, two other guys, Woodside and Lobel. Yeah. And he's based in Colorado Springs. I was about to meet up with him once, and then I think he got very nervous or something, and door got shut in my face, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so, I was very fascinated to learn more about extended electrodynamics, because it's this thing that keeps coming up in UFO world, but I don't know. It just, it's unclear how real it is and how it exactly works. Like you get the sense that limited bits of information are being let out, maybe strategically, but that it's, still this somewhat opaque field.
Yes, and there's hints. I know this from other scientists who are involved in the study of this discipline, that there's possibility that it's not just scalar longitudinal waves that might enable the transmission of wirelessly of electrical power, but that maybe these waves couple into other forms of energy in the physical vacuum, like gravity and anti-gravity, as just one example. So this is a potential avenue into accessing different forms of energy at a huge scale that would potentially provide an explanation for the kind of technology and performance and physics that UAP seem to exhibit. So that's the connection where people are really hunting for how in the world can these objects operate in the way that they do, and this is potentially an explanation for it. So it's appealing.
And you've also gone deep on some pretty interesting kind of exotic branches of science that deal with the Nazis as well, and the kind of World War II lore. Is that right?
Yeah, once again, at the risk of being ridiculed by my some of my scientific collaborators and friends, I've certainly read all about the Nazi Bell program. Igor Witkowski, the Polish journalist, has written some books about this, and Joseph Farrell. It's really fascinating to me, and certainly, aspects of what they at least have reported that the Nazi scientists were working on, has some superficial, at least for me as a layman, superficial similarities to the kind of hypotheses and declarations that Dr. Salvatore Paes from the Navy has put out, as well as others. So yeah, I'm interested in that. I think it's incumbent on anybody who really is digging deep into this issue to leave these stones unturned is really not a good idea, because this world is so strange that we have to have an open mind to lots of possibilities that might seem ridiculous or fantastic.
I don't know how ridiculous it is, because you do have Igor Witkowski, who's this Polish journalist who's gone fairly deep on this idea. We know this existed, Komlerstab, Skoda Works, which had two locations in modern-day Poland and modern-day Czechoslovakia. You had these underground tunnels, and you can see a test rig there, and the test rig looks like it would work with some sort of bell-shaped UFO.
Yeah.
And so I find that, absolutely fascinating. There's a great British journalist named Nick Cook who wrote a book called The Hunt for Zero Point.
Yeah.
And he actually investigated all of this. And he would again say, we know Komlerstab is real. He's seen the test rig. He's gone underground and stuff, and not a ton of evidence there, but there's some cables that are really interesting and intriguing. And then it was rumored that Walter Gerlach, who was, very interested in gravity and anti-gravity, was working on this from like the physics perspective. And then Ernest Grauwitz, who was an SS medical officer who studied reported to Joseph Mengele, was on this. And so this was this idea that this Nazi bell you'd create this high energy torsion field around it. It would slow down the inertial reference frame of what's inside the bell. And so say everything inside the bell is moving at 1/1000th of the outside or whatever. You spend a year inside this thing, you walk out, you're 1,000 years in the future. It sounds so fantastical and kind of insane, but from, theoretically, from like a general relativity perspective, it actually doesn't break much. And you don't even have to, kind of combat Stephen Hawking's chronological conjecture, because you're not talking about backwards time travel. Anyways, it's all super fascinating, but you've uncovered some connections between the Nazis and their interest in the occult and esoteric, as to how they might have kind of been clued into the architecture of this Die Glocke bell. You know that moment when you slip into something and instantly wonder how you ever lived without it? That's exactly how I felt the first time I put on Chubby's original stretch shorts. The super elastic waistband feels like it was custom made for comfort, and that 5.5-inch inseam hits the perfect balance between freedom and still being classy. I've been rocking mine on hikes, backyard barbecues, and of course researching for this show, and they never disappoint. Chubby's spring lineup isn't just about shorts, though their shorts are hard to beat. They're breathable stretch performance polos, wick moisture and move with you all day, while the classic line swim trunks deliver quick dry 4-way stretch and a built-in liner for maximum comfort. And if you want maximum versatility, the original stretch shorts come in 4-inch, 5.5-inch, and 7-inch inseams, all in bold prints that scream spring. Whether you're getting dressed for your workday, a workout, or a weekend getaway, Chubby's has you covered. For a limited time, Chubby's is giving our viewers 20% off your order with our code Jesse at chubbysshorts.com. That's code Jesse, Jesse, at chubbysshorts.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Don't blend in with the crowd. Stand out with chubbies.
Well, first, what I would say, Jesse, is that I don't dispute that what Witkowski and Farrell report is for the most part, correct. The question is, how effective were these programs under the Nazis? Did they really succeed at what they were aiming at? But when you talk about things that I've uncovered, it's others have uncovered it. I've just happened to have read about it, but certainly I think it's pretty well documented that the Nazis had this attraction to the occult that led them to investigate all sorts of odd things, mystical things, even. And I think it was Witkowski who described their expeditions to the Himalayas in search of these Aryan myths, and trying to chase those down. And of course, one of the interesting Himalayan myths that's pertinent to this issue I hope I'm pronouncing this right. If not, I hope experts will forgive me. But the Vimana phenomena. And what's interesting is that there are suggestions in those Vimana traditions that these gods who flew around in these airships, which, by the way, could fly the way UAP do, allegedly, that they used sort of these rotating cylinders filled with a form of mercury. And of course, that's what Witkowski says that the Nazi Bell program was doing. It was a red mercury compound in these cylinders, these counter-rotating cylinders that was producing these levitation effects. So it's a very interesting correlation. Maybe the Nazis were convinced that these Himalayan traditions were onto something there. And of course, for students of the history of the Cold War, at the tail end of the Cold War and into the 90s, coming out of the former Soviet Union, were all these stories about this substance called red mercury that was alleged to have these amazing properties, and that it was being sold on the black market and so on. And most of the intelligence community, I think, who studied this, concluded that it was a hoax and that it was fraudulent. But there you have it. There was a black market in red mercury. So this whole thing pops up again in much more modern times. So it's interesting. I like leaving no stone unturned and trying to connect dots and see if there's any basis for it.
It's fascinating. You also, we just got breakfast, and you were telling me about some very interesting overlaps between American investigations into Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters are these seemingly controlled ball lightning kind of plasma orb thingies that Allied fighter pilots would often see in Nazi Germany, specifically in Bavaria from 1942 to 1945. You uncovered some connections around American investigations into those, and then what ended up in this sort of UFO cover-up with the Robertson panel of 1952, which created Blue Book.
Well, again, Jesse, I certainly didn't uncover this. It's like, but it's out there in the history of the investigations of the Foo Fighter phenomenon, both in the European theater as well as in the Far East, in the Pacific theater. And indeed, you read the accounts of the Foo Fighter phenomenon, and they read almost exactly like post World War II and up to the present time accounts of UAP. So I'm pretty confident that we're dealing with the same phenomenon. And indeed, what's really important about the Foo Fighter phenomenon is, if you think back on the context, the Allies were paranoid about German innovation and the chance that they were working on some very exotic technologies that would really, really disadvantage the Allied forces. And when the Foo Fighter phenomenon was becoming, noticed and a thing, I think it's perfectly clear that the Allies were intelligence services and operational commanders were really worried. What the hell is this? And does it represent some German secret exotic weapons technology? And it was studied, and I think it was studied pretty carefully. And one of the people that was assigned to conduct that study happened to be Dr. Howard Robertson from Caltech, who 7 years after the war was chosen, I'm sure not coincidentally, to lead up the CIA's infamous Robertson panel. But another historical figure that was involved in the Foo Fighter investigations with Robertson is the future Nobelist Luis Alvarez, a tremendously accomplished physicist. And the both of them, I mean, Alvarez was also on the Robertson panel.
Right.
And of course, the Robertson panel, for any of your viewers and listeners who are not familiar, in 1952, after the so-called UFO, I forget what they call it, flyovers in Washington, D.C.
Sort of the headlines on the newspapers were, saucers on the White House lawn.
Exactly.
It was mass sightings in July, specifically July 19th and 20th and 26th and 27th of 1952.
That's right. So in the wake of that, the Robertson panel made these recommendations in secret. One recommendation was that the U.S. government needed to be out debunking the existence of any reality about these UFO phenomena. But then their second recommendation, which is not always noted in the accounts of it, is that they strongly recommended that the government figure out how to detect and track these anomalous UFO types of phenomenon in order, they said, to differentiate between, a real Russian Soviet bomber coming over the North Pole and versus some UFO, right? So this was a practical matter, as they put it. But nonetheless, it's interesting that they really recommended that the government figure out how to detect and track and differentiate these things from real, tangible fighters and bombers. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, and this is pertinent to your point, is that we started in World War II to really think about and worry about UFOs. We just called them Foo Fighters, right? And I think that this is an important lesson when contemplating whether the United States government ever took and has ever taken UFOs seriously. You bet your ass they have.
Oh yeah. Well, nobody can dispute that H.P. Robertson, who was a Caltech physicist, and Luis Walter Alvarez went out there and studied this stuff and then sat on the Robertson panel, which sort of, ended up determining UFO secrecy or the government's orientation towards it, at least public facing, with Blue Book for the next 2 decades. So, and then there's also another, anecdote from that time. 1946 and 7, there were these ghost rockets showing up in Sweden.
Yeah.
They looked like these modified V2s. You had over 1,000 sightings of these. And so, again, not disputed that Eisenhower sent General James Doolittle out to investigate that. And then who knows if this is correlated, but James Doolittle comes back, and I believe he becomes the chair of NACA. Looks into like kind of exotic propulsion modalities in the U.S. after that. And so I do think you have to ask your question. If you're you have to ask the question, if you're a complete skeptic, you want to write off the whole UFO thing, where did those inquiries go? Because I believe that, we've made progress since then. So yeah, I think the whole thing's so fascinating. So let's shift gears a little bit. Kirk, have you spoken to anybody in a classified setting or not who has seen craft firsthand?
You mean seen recovered
Seen recovered
crash, a craft and or stuff that we may have built?
Yeah.
Yes. These are people who found their way one way or another to us on Capitol Hill and met with senators and who made precisely those kinds of claims.
When you say stuff that we could have built, you don't mean a B-2 or F-117 or F-35 going down, right? You
No,
mean
the allegations are that we have
reverse engineered.
We have reverse engineered something that at least has some of the capabilities that UFOs and UAP have reportedly displayed.
At that point, that's such a bold claim. How do you follow up and try to get like a smoking gun that this is not of human origin and that this isn't some super sophisticated tech protection program that's trying to psyop our civilian government, which again may be prima facie absurd, but like extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence.
I'm not fond of that assertion, by the way.
I agree. Well, I think in the UFO stuff we have an abundance of evidence, and we need extraordinary investigation, and we, we're just sort of like mentally like, not in the right. Our priors don't allow us to actually accept that this is real, and we don't do the proper investigating. But anyways.
Well, Jesse, I would say first of all that your question is how does one go about proving this?
Yeah.
And I will take that with respect to my personal situation as a staff member for a committee in Congress, that we had very limited ability to determine the veracity of these reports. First of all, the folks who were telling this, making these claims, were not willing to have to come out in public for the most part. Dave Grusch is an exception, but Dave doesn't claim absolute direct firsthand knowledge. So people did not want to. They were afraid to come forward publicly. But in addition, if the more specifics they gave you, the more they were worried about them being identified by the security services being able to tell, well, Congress is saying that somebody told them this. Well, there's a small number of people that knew that, right? So it's not that we had so much specific actionable information that we were able to act on, but more fundamentally, for Congress to undertake the kind of investigation that would be necessary to pry through the kinds of security structures that have allegedly been built around this topic, that's a big lift for elected members of Congress. Like, investigations, like the Church Pike post-Watergate investigations or Iran-Contra, these members have to be pretty confident that there are really important, no kidding, reality behind the issues, right? So you kick off a no-holds-barred investigation, you better be damn sure that there's a prize there, or something that's for sure going to be discovered and revealed. And I don't think that Congress feels that collectively that they're at that point yet. I think this is why you consistently hear the appeal for more people with direct sources to come forward. Ideally in public, but at least in private. come to Congress and tell your stories.
Do these people, are you sussing them out? Do they seem genuinely afraid for their lives? Do they seem like these kind of slick operators where it's like they could pull the wool over your eyes, or like how do they pattern match? Because I imagine even for your own, so you're a curious human being, you have to be thinking, this person is telling me they're recovering alien extraterrestrial craft. I want to know if this is true for not only for humanity and for the US, but like for myself. And so how are you trying to suss that out? Today, I want to share something that's become a game changer for me personally, Qualia Senolytic. Have you ever heard about senolytics? It's a revolutionary class of ingredients that researchers discovered less than a decade ago, and they're already being hailed as one of the biggest breakthroughs in promoting healthy aging. This is where Qualia Senolytic shines. As we age, our bodies accumulate what scientists call senescent cells, also known as zombie cells. These cells just sit there, hogging resources and dragging down your energy, recovery, and even mental clarity. Think of it like pruning a plant. You've got to remove the dead leaves to get the rest to thrive. Since I started taking Qualia Senolytic, I've felt a huge boost in energy and productivity. I'm sharper, more focused, and genuinely feel like I've rolled the clock back. And here's the kicker. You only need to take it 2 days a month. This science-backed formula is non-GMO, vegan, and designed to work synergistically to help your body shed those zombie cells. And with a 100-day money-back guarantee, there's zero risk in trying it out for yourself. So resist aging at the cellular level and try Qualia Senolytic. Go to qualialife.com/Jesse for up to 50% off and use code Jesse at checkout for an additional 15% off. For your convenience, Qualia Senolytic is also available at select GNC locations near you. That's QUALIA life.com/Jesse for an extra 15% off your purchase. Thanks so much to Qualia for sponsoring today's episode.
Well, I would say, Jesse, that my clear sense is that I and most, if not all, of the colleagues, staff colleagues who were involved, and certainly some of the key senators who were involved, found these individuals to be credible, and sane. And to your question about were they believable when they would express concerns for their own safety and that of their families and of their careers, I would say that's very definitely was credible. I mean, what I mean by that is we believed them that they felt that way. And it was almost, in some cases, palpable. I can recall an instance where one source, when initiating, an explanation of what they knew, was visibly shaking. I mean,
Wow.
physically so stressed about it.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't think that these folks are making it up. They feel that there are grave risks, and
And these are people that have not gone public. They're not the whistleblowers the public knows.
Well, that's right. I don't want to give the wrong impression. It's not like there's hordes of these people or
Sure.
dozens even, but there's a handful.
Yep.
And they are very concerned.
They don't feel
Yeah.
safe to come out fully, or
Yes, that's right. It's like they have the sort of the fear of God
Jesus.
in them about the consequences.
Are you aware of people who've died or faced retribution around coming out, or?
Well, I don't think you need to look any further than the case of Dave Grusch. I mean, he's not even a what you'd call a firsthand witness or source. But Dave had a hard go of it, and some of the the things that have happened to him are not even in the public domain.
Yeah.
I believe, and so I think there's real risk. I mean, this is not to come out is almost clearly not career enhancing.
No.
To be sarcastic
Yeah.
about it. And I would say, look, Lou Elizondo had to go find another career path,
Hmm.
as has Dave.
I think Lou's also talked about being on a hit list.
Yeah, they have. They believe that that has happened.
Hmm.
I can't positively assert that these things are true. But neither can I dismiss him.
Have you spoken to anybody who claims to have seen biologics?
Let me think about that one. If I personally know people, I think the answer to that is no. I don't think that I personally know someone who claims to have seen biologics.
How in your assessment is the program run? I think what I struggle with personally, as do a lot of other people, is like there's clearly no clear central chain of command, or if there is, it's extremely well hidden, and it seems like these sort of middle management cutouts in various organizations, where like leadership in those specific organizations are half aware that these things even exist, and money is being funneled from other kind of private interests or whatever. The whole thing seems insane. Like I've personally heard of extremely high-ranking members of government where they're not, clued in, they're not briefed to this stuff, and then their deputies are. And you hear something like that, and you're like, how does that even work? Like, what? That makes no sense on some level. Maybe it does in this sort of, super swampy, bureaucratic mess that is Washington. But yeah, how do you make sense of it?
Jesse, the short answer is I can't make sense of it. What the way you've characterized what is out there in terms of what people have said, confidentially and otherwise is right. And I think based upon the amount of information that I have, I don't think it's possible to actually determine with confidence what the management structure, if one exists, what it looks like. Does it make any sense at all? Is it sort of this crazy spaghetti that you've kind of described? And how could that possibly be true? I think this is the answers to this conundrum will have to await some genuine disclosure.
Trump has talked a lot about other disclosures, a la Jeffrey Epstein, JFK, 9/11, things of that nature. You have the Department of Government Efficiency sort of running, roughshod through a lot of these sort of bloated, agencies. Do you think we have any disclosures on the UAP front, and maybe even, beyond that? Do we get disclosures about like is any of Tesla's work still classified? I'm pretty sure Thomas Townsend Brown's work is still classified by the Navy. So do we get scientific disclosures or disclosures around UAP, UFO?
I really have no idea. Of course, there's been a lot of observers of the UAP issue who have taken heart from the public positions of a decent number of advisors and now cabinet members, and even the national security advisor saying positive things about UAP transparency. And there was a lot of optimism that we will see a new level of disclosure and transparency from this administration. So far, I don't think we've seen significant indications that that's going to happen. Frankly, I think the first official act that the Trump administration took in dismissing what was going on up in New Jersey, for example, that this was an FAA regulated set of events, it does not bode well. And furthermore, I think that there's some developing disappointment that whenever the Trump administration lists its objectives with regard to revealing really significant classified information about the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, Martin Luther King, and Jeffrey Epstein, and so on. They list all those, and then it sometimes seems like the UFO issue is either mentioned sort of in passing at the end or not mentioned at all. So we'll have to obviously wait and see what happens. But I think that there's reasons to be concerned that we might not get the disclosure that people had hoped for.
How big was the Senate Armed Services Committee when you were on it? How many people?
You mean how many members?
Yeah, how many members?
Roughly 2 dozen.
2 dozen.
A little more. I think they've actually expanded in this current session again up to 27 members.
Okay. So, what percentage of those 24 to 27 members believe that UFOs are real and being systematically looked into in a government context?
Jesse, I could not possibly speculate on that, if I did know, it's not something that I would want to reveal. This is
well, were you a total lone wolf, I guess is what I'm trying to say? Were you completely isolated in believing this, or?
No, there were certainly some members who, by their actions, clearly conveyed that they were interested in this topic and believed that there was, a reason to push the government to reveal more of what they believe the government knows about this topic. Is every member of the Senate Armed Services Committee or the Senate Intelligence Committee, a believer? I would say I really have no idea. Was there interest in this? Yeah, and I think there's there's sort of gradations here because they're all concerned. Everyone in national security is concerned about these overflights of sensitive facilities. What's really hard to figure out is how much of that is like hobby shop drones. How much of that is potentially some adversary, but still far from anomalous, sort of conventional types of drone technologies, versus what is perhaps anomalous, genuinely, and what might be exotic technology of an adversary or something that's genuinely non-human intelligence, and so forth. I think everyone is interested in the security of our sensitive facilities and want the government to figure out what the hell's going on at places like Langley Air Force Base and our air bases in the UK and over sensitive facilities in New Jersey or wherever they may be.
You hear things reportedly from David Grusch, like Dick Cheney was a gatekeeper for the legacy UFO efforts. I mean, on the one hand, it would kind of make sense because he seems to have been, if there was anybody who was kind of running, the show behind George W. Bush, it was probably Dick Cheney. And so that kind of comports with our understanding of this whole issue of like, it's almost like Lord of the Rings if you have the ring or something, that confers some sort of weird power. And then on the other hand, it's just so absurd. I mean, Dick Cheney is very old, but he's still alive, and he's
Mhm.
a very high profile person. So like, it's a part of me is just like, can we just ask the guy? Like, do you think that Dick Cheney had any involvement with UFOs?
Well, there's a difference here between what I think, there's evidence for and what I personally kind of believe. What I would say is that we've certainly heard the same accounts that you're referring to. That and the pet, the sequence goes like this: that George H.W. Bush, as the director of CIA, was read in allegedly to this so-called legacy program, and that he passed on what he knew about that to his son George W. And it is reported by some that the George W. Bush administration did really take a more hands-on approach to the UFO UAP issue. And it has been reported by some that yes, Dick Cheney, as vice president, was sort of in charge of that, and that his national security staff and the National Security Council staff were involved. How many of them? I've never heard a report claiming, claiming any knowledge about how deep or extensive the staff was involved in that. But certainly, we've heard those reports. Yeah. But I just can't tell you for sure that happened. Now, there was a report that the National Security Council under George W. Bush did commission a study of whether the time had come for, quote, disclosure, and that they studied the matter. They let out a contract, and it was there was an assessment done, and then it was debated. And the conclusion that was reached was that no, the time was not right yet. It would be still
Catastrophic.
Yeah, well, catastrophic. There would be the consequences. The negative consequences would outweigh the benefits. Let's put it that way, at a minimum. And this story was reported to Sean Kirkpatrick at Arrow. And we subsequently heard from Sean directly that he had looked into this, or had somebody look into it, and that indeed there had been a contract for such a study, and the basis of the study was suppose the United States government had in its possession, and I forget the number, 6 or 12 recovered extraterrestrial craft, and should the United States government disclose this fact? Okay. What was said to us from Sean Kirkpatrick is that there was such a study, but it was purely an academic exercise, that allegedly there was just an entity in the Defense Department. I think it was probably the Office of Net Assessment, which is the futuristic element within the department that is supposed to look at strange what if kinds of scenarios, that they had decided to, just for the heck of it, postulate, what if we had a bunch of crashed UFOs? Should we reveal it or not? I think that kind of strains credulity, that somebody in
Why
the
would you
Defense
ever
Department—
simulate something that, if you're convinced, isn't real? I mean, it's so absurd. In the hypothetical scenario that we had unicorns in our possession,
Exactly.
we have to figure out a plan. I mean, that's crazy. Also, Hal Puthoff is on record saying he consulted for this net assessment. National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley was involved, and that they, came to the conclusion that you mentioned, which is that the costs outweighed the benefits as far as disclosure went. So one of them is lying, and I don't think it's Hal Puthoff.
Yeah, I think Hal is a pretty straight shooter, and that's why when you asked the question, I said personally, I tend to believe that this took place the way it was has been characterized by Hal. Yeah,
And so, yeah, so Kirkpatrick, is this very interesting character where I've heard all these stories of people who've had experiences in the government. Like, you have this great book by Robert Hastings called UFOs and Nukes, where you have, over 160 ICBM security personnel, radar operators, employees at nuclear bases experiencing tic tac, saucers, all sorts of things, showing up at, nuclear sites, tampering with the comms, shutting down missile silos. In certain cases, the employees board crafts and they wake up miles away. It's fascinating stuff. And he and many of the witnesses say that, testimonies to Kirkpatrick, the guy's not taking notes.
hmm
He's literally just listening to these sacred, very important stories that are dear and that are very personal to these people, that, profound. And then sort of there's never any follow-up.
yeah,
And so I guess my question is, we know that there is a long-standing tradition in government of obfuscation around the UFO topic. You had Edward Condon created the Condon Committee, and all of the people on the Condon Committee were like, this is a bad faith effort, and we didn't actually, anything that even made it into study was like already ruled out as like a, hoax or a bad case. You have letters now between Condon and Air Force Colonel Robert Hippler, where Hippler's saying, we want this to be shown as a waste of money, and Condon kind of implicitly complying with that.
Absolutely. I don't think implicitly. I think
Explicitly. Yeah. And Condon also was a longtime associate of Robert Oppenheimer's, and goes way back when it comes to atomic secrecy. In fact, if you believe David Grusch, which I do, the Atomic Energy Commission, which created UFO secrecy in 1954, the precursor to that was the McMahon Secrecy Act of 46, which Condon wrote. So the person writing UFO secrecy is then going on to debunk it. So the whole thing's so ridiculous. Is Kirkpatrick a modern version of that?
Well, look, I don't like to cast aspersions unnecessarily, for sure. And I've known Sean actually for 20 years, and I had worked with him a good bit.
Wow, you've known him
over that time.
for 20 years.
I have known Sean for a long time. I knew him from when he was a program manager at the National Reconnaissance Office. And subsequently, we stayed in touch through his career progression within the defense intelligence community, and principally DIA. In fact, when we first started on the Senate Armed Services Committee and Senate Intelligence Committee to investigate this matter after the New York Times article in 2017, I involved Sean in our work. I invited him with some regularity to sit in on our interviews of Navy pilots and some of the scientific figures. I mean, I think there was a picture posted online, perhaps by Brandon Fugel, the owner of Skinwalker Ranch, of Fugel's team briefing in an Armed Services Committee hearing room, and there's a picture of Sean sitting next to us.
Yeah.
Well, I had invited Sean to that meeting, but I do feel that Sean ended up taking a very traditional DoD line on the UAP issue.
Do you think that was intellectually genuine or disingenuous?
Look, I don't know. I personally feel that there was a point at the beginning of his service as the director of Aero that Sean was committed to calling it as he saw it. I do feel like there might have been then some change, and there's speculation that he was read into the legacy program and told, in no uncertain terms that you need to sustain the the sort of the party line that's been in existence for so long. But look, I have no idea if
Well, he
that
worked-
actually happened or
Didn't
not.
he work at Oak Ridge National Labs too? So
Well, let's see. Sean, I don't know, like before he took the Arrow job, what association, if any, he had with Oak Ridge, but he did start working with Oak Ridge. He created an advisory group. I can't remember what it was called officially, but I think that group still exists. And the contract for the formation of that group to advise him at Arrow, the contract was let through Oak Ridge. And then when Sean retired from the government, he is working with and for Oak Ridge under contract now.
that's
Yeah.
seems like a potential conflict of interest if you believe that UFO secrecy has anything to do with atomic
Yeah.
secrecy, which I'm assuming you do. I believe that.
Yeah.
That seems like an issue, possibly, that there's financial outflows from the organization that you're supposed to be investigating.
Yeah, conflicts of interest or allegations are easy to make, but not so easy to sort out. But it is certainly worth taking note of, if nothing else.
I just don't see. I've spoken to a lot of the same people as him, and like these people are good people. They're honest. Like this guy Mario Woods, 1977, Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. Maybe you are familiar with his case.
I don't think I am.
Well, he's a lot of these guys. He was woke up 9 miles away. Near Lake Newell.
This is in Robert Hastings' book.
Robert Hastings' book.
Yeah.
And he had this just profound experience, and then he maintained his Q clearance for 20 years after that. And if you think this guy is having an anomalous incident that you've never heard about before, why wouldn't you strip him of his Q clearance if you hadn't had heard it a million times? Why wouldn't you strip him of his Q clearance if you've, this is just a one-of-one case and the guy's claiming something that ostensibly seems crazy. And then he describes this whole protocol of them checking his teeth and doing medical stuff. And it's like, it was as if they had seen this a million times before.
Yeah.
And you have to think of 170 of these people, which is a large number, have come out in the last 70 years. It's probably in the thousands as far as people who've experienced this, because you're talking about a culture of, insane secrecy, talking about Cold War secrecy era stuff. And then people with Q clearances who don't get into this line of work because they're histrionic. And so you talk to a lot of these guys, Bob Jacobs, many of the others, and they're just not liars. And if you're telling me that the guy, Kirkpatrick sitting across from them, he's not taking notes, and then he kind of dismisses them and then dismisses the whole thing publicly out of hand, either I'm crazy and the whole computer going on in my brain is malfunctioning and I need to be taken off air, or like there's something weird going on there.
I don't disagree at all. And with regard to the notes part, first of all, it was objectionable to me personally that the Arrow office didn't videotape and record, at least record everything that was said. But they didn't operate that way. My understanding is they did take notes. I'm not saying that Sean Kirkpatrick himself took notes, but my understanding was that at least in all the episodes that I've heard about, the interviews that I've heard about, there was somebody at least taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
But that seems insufficient to me. You need to hear, to record verbatim what was said. Furthermore, as you noted, these things would then just go into a black hole. The record of these interviews. I think Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis to this day have never been shown the notes from their meetings with Arrow. For them to review and say, yes, this is accurate. This is what I said, and this is what happened. It's just they never heard from him again.
And in certain cases, Hastings has mentioned that the evidence gets erased or something. So they'll say,
yes,
you've heard that too.
I have heard.
So it's like the tapes are here of this UFO thing, and then the tapes are gone right after they tell them that.
Oh yeah, I thought you meant like their interview, the interview notes, or what was provided to Arrow,
No, I
like
hear that the
disappeared.
primary
Yeah.
material in certain cases, they'll say the location and then there's a weird break-in or something after.
Well, I don't know, but I know there was an episode like this with Lou Elizondo where he told them of a particular location, an office, a safe drawer, and the only to be told that when they opened it up, there was nothing there.
Yep.
So these are worrisome reports for sure. But Jesse, you mentioned Robert Hastings and all of these events that happened at nuclear weapons sites. This is so important to this question about, does the government take this matter seriously? And again, we started out talking about the Foo Fighter experience in World War II, but after the war, as soon as the United States started building substantial nuclear forces and facilities, there's just this constant visitation and monitoring by, at the least, by UAP. When you get into the 1960s, there are these amazing events that happen. You mentioned Robert Jacobs, the Big Sur event in 1964. But Dr. Harold Malmgren has alerted the world, as it were, to events that took place in 1962. In fact, some of them at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. This has been documented by, I think, you, as well as Jeff Cruikshank from Australia, and certainly a lot of Reddit users. Harold Malmgren, before he passed away, and what a tragic loss, I might add. He was such an incredible, statesman, diplomat, defense thinker, economist, and so forth. But going back to 1962, he was the youngest of McNamara's whiz kids. He was involved in the day-to-day deliberations about what to do when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. After the Cuban Missile Crisis was over, he was commissioned by McNamara to lead a study of the potential for missile defenses to contribute to presidential options when a future Cuban Missile Crisis might take place. And as no sooner had Harold Malmgren been given that assignment, he was contacted by a famous CIA officer, Richard Bissell,
Number 2 in the CIA, deputy director.
That's right. And Bissell met with Malmgren and told him. He said, "Look, you've been given this assignment to develop missile defense options and to explore the potential for missile defenses to contribute to deterrence. And you need to know that in the test that happened in October 26, 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a test of a special warhead designed to produce enhanced X-ray output." Called the XW51 X1 or something like that. It was amazing. Malmgren, at 89 years old, rattled off the name of that warhead from memory.
Yeah, he's a genius.
He is, and it was. Okay, so taking you back specifically to that event, we set off that warhead. It was the Bluegill Triple Prime atmospheric test. And it was designed to destroy a dummy reentry vehicle with this sizable warhead using enhanced X-rays. And the X-rays would would have caused this chain of events in the target, where you would get this spallation from inside the inside layers of the reentry vehicle, and it would tear apart the reentry vehicle. So this was the third attempt, as I recall, maybe even the fourth, to test this device in the atmosphere. And it was successful. It exploded as planned, and there were two RC-135 Cobra Ball airplanes up taking video of this. One, I think, representing Los Alamos, one representing Lawrence Livermore Lab. And they, each of those aircraft, filmed this fireball and what happened to the test RV. And as soon as that fireball erupts, you see this object come tumbling out of the fireball, heading for the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, this video is available. It's open source. And you see, it's really crazy because Lawrence Livermore, you see the object tumbling out, and then Los Alamos, you see a white triangle superimposing the video.
I thought it was the other way around.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
I thought
maybe
it was Livermore's
was more secret,
that covered up the object.
Interesting.
And it was Los Alamos, and I think the warhead was a Los Alamos design.
Okay.
Anyway, the trivia.
No, that's good correction.
Yeah, so you actually see this object clearly in the Los Alamos video, and what Malmgren reported that he'd been told directly by Bissell is that we downed a UFO that was closely monitoring that test, and it tumbled into the ocean, and that the Navy picked it up. So you mentioned that the video of this test has been declassified and was released. I think it was back in the late 90s, and also released or declassified and released were the ship logs, because in tests like that, and this was out near Johnston Atoll, the Navy would have a contingent of ships that would help to collect the debris and the sensors that had been deployed to watch the test. Okay, they would fall into the ocean, then they would be picked up. And part of those the information in those ship's logs is that they picked up some highly radioactive debris. One was described as a black sphere. Another was described as a green tube that were not part of the instrument package that they were supposed to pick up. These were anomalous items floating in the water that they tested them with radioactive detectors, and they had been highly radioactive, meaning they had been very close to the fireball, and they retrieved those. And then there's also a log that says the Navy also conducted a salvage operation. So this lines up perfectly with what Malmgren was told by Richard Bissell.
I think Malmgren, even more than that, was in charge of costing for these missile defense systems. So he was in charge of that, and I think he was like frustrated at not being sort of read in because he had blanket Q clearances. And so he then, as a result of that, goes and visits Lawrence Geis, who's Jeff Bezos's maternal grandfather, right, and the Albuquerque director of the Atomic Energy Commission, because the materials get taken from the Marshall Islands, Johnston Atoll, to Sandia National Laboratories. And so Malmgren actually investigates this on behalf of the Kennedy administration. So the whole thing's so fascinating. And then I think a month later, Kennedy goes and visits Los Alamos, which, I don't know if that's a coincidence.
Actually, Kennedy, this has been documented by Jeff Cruikshank.
Yeah, he's amazing researcher.
He's listed the attendees on that trip, and it was Kennedy and Johnson and the National Security Advisor, I think.
George McBundy.
It was McBundy.
McBundy, yeah.
But then also the famous General Curtis LeMay was part of that trip. And Curtis LeMay, of course, I think at the time was the commander of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
So at any event, there was an interesting, a very interesting delegation soon after the Cuban Missile Crisis does go on this tour of various nuclear installations and facilities out west. Malmgren also made a trip during which, as you say, I think he met with Lawrence Geese or Geis, however you pronounce it, and others. So here's the other interesting thing, though. 5 weeks before that bluegill triple prime test, there was another test. This one was of a new reentry vehicle designed by a company that's now defunct or been absorbed many times over, called Avco. And Avco had built a new reentry vehicle called the Mark IV. And this, too, has all been declassified, where in the test of that new RV, it is released, close to the atmosphere, and you see it traveling at very high speed and starting to re-enter the atmosphere. And all of a sudden, behind it, you see this bright white light that catches up to the RV over a fairly significant distance. It catches up to the RV and accompanies it further in its trajectory. And in the official report made to the Defense Department about this test, it says right in there, objects of unknown origin and identity were tracking or pacing, I forget the exact words that were used, the Mark IV reentry vehicle. So this is a UFO.
Wow.
This is
Wow.
a UFO that is closely flying and catching up to a warhead that's going, I don't know, 10,000 miles an hour.
What test was this? What was this called?
Jesse, I don't remember the name of the test, but it's easily found. It was on September 19th, 1962.
Wow. And you
So-
see the records.
Oh, sure. The video is online.
There's the video, and you see it. You see a UFO catching up.
Yes, you see it. I mean, you don't see any details, but you see this white object, this luminous object, come roaring up, chasing the reentry vehicle.
That's wild. Can you send that to me? I'd love
Sure,
to. Yeah.
yeah.
We'll link that for people.
And it was reported in the official reports. Of this, right?
Unbelievable.
And so then let's fast forward like 2 years and approximately 18 months, and Robert Jacobs has an assignment out in Big Sur, California, to film this test of an ICBM launched from Vandenberg, an Atlas, and it's got a dummy warhead on it. And according to Robert Jacobs and his commanding officer, Major Mansman, I mean, this is a well-known story. This reentry vehicle is moving at, like, I forget the number, 9,000 to 12,000 miles an hour. And you see this, according to the witnesses of this video, that you see a UFO, and it is saucer-shaped, and it starts flying around the reentry vehicle.
Yep.
And shooting some beams at it, and that it disabled this test reentry vehicle.
And then CIA suits show up and kind of confiscate the video, and then basically Jacobs is erased from the government. They say that he never worked at the government.
Yeah.
And the whole thing's kind of crazy. And then he gets all these threats. His mailbox blows up. Eventually, Florence Mansman, his superior, has to admit that actually Bob Jacobs did work, in fact, for Vandenberg and managed, I think 130 people or something.
Yes, his team was quite large.
So now he's being sort of vindicated. But yeah, it's really wild what he had to sort of go through. And Lou Elizondo says that he has seen the video.
That's correct. Lou says that he had a copy.
And he says he has
video.
backups of the video. And so I would, Lou, if you're watching this, please release that video. Just release the video. I mean, that video would be so effective and powerful. Do you think it would be like the sources and methods thing that would endanger our? Because I mean, you're talking about 1964, technology. I think that would just be a net positive for humanity and not reveal anything as far as national security trade secrets.
There is an account that contests Robert Jacobs' account. By a man with some very good credentials who claims that Jacobs was confused about which date of this test and so on and so forth. It's a long, complicated story. But the Defense Department, Arrow, has taken the position that Jacobs was wrong in what he claims to have seen. But my point is, like, if you look back at what happened in 1962 as documented by Harold Malmgren and others, and we have the video evidence, that lends a lot of credibility to Robert Jacobs' story.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's the same phenomenon.
It's the same phenomena. I mean, one you could say is sending X-rays out in a way that actually, if you have a vehicle referencing the magnetosphere of the Earth, like that's a lot of people think that's how UFOs might fly. Just like, avian cryptochromes, like these birds that have the CRY4 protein, they use electron spin to sense where the Earth is, and that helps them navigate home. So they use kind of quantum biology, quantum sensing to actually navigate. That theoretically is how, the UFOs might sense. And so if you're messing with the local magnetosphere, you could see these things sort of crashing. Whereas I think the dummy blast, the nuclear dummy blast of 1964 with Bob Jacobs, that points a little more towards this sort of three-body problem. Like, the UFOs are sort of worried about, like, the tip of the spear of our advancements in weaponry. They're worried about us disturbing, our biosphere and taking ourselves out. Either way, very similar.
It's very similar phenomena. Yeah. And the point is that it appears like routinely UAP were flying around watching our ICBM tests and our nuclear warhead tests in the atmosphere.
Well, there's so much documentation of that. If anybody actually reads Robert Hastings' book, which is, I feel like that half the reason my show exists is to just tell people to read that book, because that's like the most, it's just so canonical and detailed and documented. You have these, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan, but it's like sometimes I'm like, dude, just read that book and you'll like be a little less confused, because at least you can start with a foundation. You're not having to ping off of all these disparate kind of, contemporary witnesses. Just read that book. Like, I realize he's like doesn't have time. He's very busy, but or Tulsi or any of these people in power, like just read that. But that book is so, because it helps you start with a baseline of like, that would be that would be like the bottom of the Jenga block as far as my like intellectual foundation of this. So if you were to pull that, it would be, I would have to admit, it would really shake my foundation on this whole topic. But it's just so solid. It's so meticulously written. And, I think if you actually read it and you talk to Hastings, who I've become friends with, it's hard to deny. So
it is.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse, one final thing on this point is that, I mean, imagine this: we resumed atmospheric testing in 1962 after the Soviets violated the unofficial moratorium on atmospheric nuclear tests. So we resumed testing. We're going through this very, very tense, obviously, this crisis with the Soviet Union over missiles in Cuba. And during this, at the height of this UFO is downed by a nuclear warhead. Okay, and on September 19th, you have this UFO catching up with a warhead, the Avco warhead, going 10,000, 12,000 miles an hour. 2 years later, you have the same thing happen with Robert Jacobs' event in California. Can you imagine the Defense Department just saying, "Oh, well, these UFOs are tracking our shit.
Yeah.
But we're not concerned about that."
Yeah.
I mean, it's inconceivable. They would have been crapping in their pants.
Of course. Yeah.
And there's nothing else that could. I mean, do you think that the Soviets at that time had an ability across the world to have a spaceship that could accelerate faster than an incoming RV and catch up to it and monitor it?
Yeah.
No.
And in the case of Bob Salas, Malmstrom 1967 literally shut down our missile silos.
Yes.
Like, no, that's obviously not.
If you can shut down our ICBMs I mean,
You win
that
game,
is-
set, match. You win the war.
that is the scariest thing that you can imagine for the National Command Authority.
No, the Soviets would have won the war if you had that
Yeah.
ability to do that in a repeatable, predictable way technologically. That would be it.
So anyone who thinks that the United States government wouldn't have been paying the closest possible attention to the UFO phenomena all these years, it's nuts. It's inconceivable to me.
I fully agree with you. On that note, how do we get better whistleblower protections? In 2023 timeframe, we had this Gallagher amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, specifically to the Schumer amendment, and the UAP disclosure initiative as part of the yearly defense budget. And everybody thought after we got the Gallagher amendment, you'd have this sort of breaking down the dam of people coming out and speaking about the UFO issue. Why do you think that hasn't been effective? And do you think we end up with stronger whistleblower protection so people can actually come out?
Well, this too is a kind of catch-22. We need whistleblowers, more sources with direct involvement to come forward. I hear this constantly from folks on the Hill, both before I retired and since. And yet whistleblowers don't want to come forward because they're afraid of retribution and retaliation. And so then you say, well, we need better whistleblower protections. But to get whistleblower protections, you have to convince people in Congress who are worried about what is the right balance of whistleblower protections versus good order and discipline, and having people follow orders and stay in their place in the bureaucracy and so on. The whole degree of general whistleblower protections is complex. I don't pretend to understand the politics of it, but I know enough to know that it is a complicated issue. And if you come forward and say, I need special protections for a special limited class of people, then everyone else who wants to protect whistleblowers says, why should I give you special protections for one small class of people? We need to expand protections for everybody. But then you have those who are dubious about enhanced whistleblower protections saying, well, we're not going to do that.
So do you have a solution to this?
A solution is a little bit hard to come by, but I think that we just have to hope for one of two things. Either the executive branch decides it's going to pursue disclosure, or B, we get more people to gird their loins and decide that it's just something that has to be done. They don't have to go public. My view.
The problem with that is it ends up in this liminal space of
It does.
You're sort of repeating their account and you have to do it at really high level. Like, I'm not convinced if somebody went on one of these whistleblowers, just went on Rogan, like tomorrow, and just talked about what they know, and they really tried to protect the national trade secret side of this, but it was really clear that it's sort of Bob Lazar 2.0, but without the details that make it easy to sort of detract from the testimony. I think that would A, get tons and tons of attention, and B, you'd have sort of this like people's champion immunity, and you'd have a president in Trump and his whole cabinet that has promised transparency. Maybe they don't quite understand the UFO issue. Maybe it's not a priority, but seeing that person after being so public, getting persecuted, I don't know. I think that feels like that would be a very tall order.
Jesse, I'm with you. I think that going public can really bring some protections for you. Now, Dave Grusch might say, what about me? Because they went after him even when he went public as a result of him going public. So I get it. It's a complex,
but I think he felt
calculation.
I think he feels safer post going public than pre. The scariest period is when they they probably have intel that you're going to go public.
Yes.
And you haven't gone public yet.
Right.
But once you've gone public, it's pretty hard to, completely destroy somebody's life. I mean, that's
Jesse, I will also say
especially in the digital age, people are waking up and they can trace things better. And I think they're sniffing out BS, to be honest, just on levels that, it's like you had the whole the Epstein thing went on for so long and other things like it. And I don't see things like that quite working today.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that do work today are like, mass surveillance and just like super quiet stuff. But like really going after individuals and trying to blackmail, like that stuff's, I don't think that's super effective on a go-forward basis.
I tend to agree with you. The other thing is that the people the people who are close to people who we want to come forward, the Hal Puthoffs, Eric Davis, Dave Grusch, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and so on. They all tell us that they know people whose preference would be to be able to tell the truth about this. But what they report is that these sources are afraid of not losing their jobs, losing their clearances, which effectively ends their career in national security. But they also are dreadfully worried about being prosecuted. And but my view about that is that, I just don't believe that it would happen. First of all,
I don't either.
There's a young lawyer named Dylan Guthrie who's got a piece that's come out in Harvard Law Review, I believe, and in a small section of his lengthy article, he talks about the fact that he has done at least some investigating. And he has found so far that there is not a single instance that he's come across where a person got indicted and prosecuted, or even indicted, I think, for having revealed information in an appropriately secure manner with Congress. Okay? This isn't about going public, but, if you contact Congress and behind closed doors, you convey to them information that was not yet shared or shared in full with Congress by the executive branch, the government has never prosecuted a case like that. And because it gets into very murky constitutional issues about what are the rights and privileges of the executive branch versus the legislative branch, right? Okay. Moreover, imagine this. Imagine if a whistleblower, a source, comes to the Senate Intelligence Committee and says, here's what I know, and lays it all out. And the government then says, the executive branch says, you shouldn't, it's against our rules for you to have said that to Congress. We're going to indict you and prosecute you. Now imagine that. Right? So something that for 80 years, the government has denied the existence of.
Yeah, right.
Right? And Congress has passed laws requiring that it be kept fully informed of anything of significance for national security. So the executive branch has violated the law, right, that Congress passed and the president signed. Imagine them coming forward and said, yeah, we didn't tell Congress about this, but we're going to prosecute you for telling Congress.
Yeah, you put them in a bind.
Good luck.
Yeah, well, they have to admit that they have knowledge of this stuff.
And the hypocrisy of such a step like that, I think Congress would be, I personally think they would be outraged.
Totally.
And would not abide it. And so I actually think that the fear of prosecution is unfounded. Now, easy for me to say. I'm not the person whose livelihood and security depends on, is at stake here. So I'm certainly understanding if people listening to this would say, yeah, fine for you to say, but I'm not taking the chance. But I really think that it's something that we have to resolve. We have to figure out a way around this catch-22.
We definitely do. A lot of this stuff seemed to come out around, you have the Church Committee of 1975. And I think it was a senator from Idaho, Frank Church, and you looked into all sorts of malfeasance on the part of the intelligence community, stemming from Watergate, obviously rumors of like the Warren Commission around JFK assassination being totally compromised, I believe it was, but also other revelations of MK Ultra and that sort of thing. Do you think any of that dovetails with this kind of UAP issue, especially maybe with respect to MK Ultra, where we know now that they were doing kind of experiments around telepathy? Like you had this guy, Andrei Puharich, who was doing experiments with, telepathic kids.
Yeah.
And is there a connection? Because when people claim to be abducted, they seem to communicate telepathically with the alien beings.
Yeah. Jesse, I think it's a great question, and it's something that I am really intrigued by because, in the 1950s, from the early 50s, I believe, I'm not a serious student of this yet. I'm certainly trying to read more and more about it. But from the 50s on up through, some say it never went away, even after the Church Committee. About they were looking into mind control, remote viewing, clairvoyance, all of that, and that overlays in time with us learning that people who encounter non-human intelligence, they're being communicated with telepathically. And so just coincidentally, the United States government all of a sudden decides to start investigating these same, psychic powers and psychic issues. It looks looks very suspicious to me.
Mhm.
Like, one of the main reasons I suspect that we were studying that stuff and had those programs was because of what we were learning about UFOs and extraterrestrials. Admittedly, we had soldiers in the Korean War who were subjected to mind control stuff, by the North Koreans and the Russians. So that certainly was a stimulus, right? That I can't discount, and I don't want to discount. But the rest of it is, as I think you're suggesting, is very suspicious in terms of the overlay with the UFO problem. I would also like to mention, I recently was told about these things called the telepathy tapes, which is getting a lot of attention now, and I've listened to a dozen of them, and for those who aren't familiar with this, these are podcasts, I guess, sessions, lengthy ones, a whole series of them about caregivers and neuroscientists and psychologists who are working with non-speaking autistic people, children as well as adults as they've grown up, and these people, it seems pretty clear, have some mental telepathy capabilities, and they connect with each other across vast distances.
The experiments need to be done more rigorously and with double-blind experimentation protocols. But if you just listen to the tapes, it's overwhelmingly obvious to a person who's not dogmatic that there's something going on.
Yeah.
And that's not explained by modern scientific paradigm.
Yeah. That's correct. Now, you mentioned earlier Hal Puthoff's work on instantaneous communications, and so Hal is searching for a physics explanation for telepathy, and probably leading into remote viewing and so forth. So what we have is the fact of telepathy happening between human beings and non-human extraterrestrials. We seem to have communication among just humans, among autistic, non-speaking people. And then you have a physics explanation that Hal Puthoff and others are working on, which involve so-called highly technical terms, scalar and vector potentials. Okay, so the only thing that's kind of missing here is like, can the human brain mimic what Hal is talking about? And so is the human brain wired in such a way, architected in such a way that it can function in these quantum mechanical ways, and in terms of modern extended electrodynamics. And there are some hints, at least out there in the medical profession, at least as a layman, I think I'm seeing that suggests that this is possibly the case.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's converging on an answer. We don't have an answer, but it's like, okay, so you have Roger Penrose, who's a very well-respected physicist, worked on black holes and collaborated with Stephen Hawking. Nobel Prize winner. And he, was sort of laughed out of the room because you can't talk about consciousness in those circles, but he has this very interesting theory called orchestrated objective reduction, which, involves a quantum biological process where we collapse Schrodinger's wave function. And you could say, you could dismiss that out of hand, whatever, but we know that there are other quantum biological processes you can now prove. I mentioned the thing of birds navigating via the magnetosphere of the Earth with electron spin and the specific avian cryptochrome protein. But there are other examples. There's, enzyme creation. There's quantum tunneling around DNA. And so, I believe photosynthesis, we now think involves quantum biological processes. So the idea that the body, which is warm, wet, and noisy, is not, can't allow for quantum coherence is going out the window. So then you have to open up this idea of maybe the Penrose model is right. And then at the same time, you have this idea that the government studied non-local consciousness modalities for decades. And this idea, the idea that, where does thought even come from? It's clearly not being locally produced. When you're daydreaming, you're not constructing your thoughts actively. It seems like you're receiving them from elsewhere. And then you have all the remote viewing data that Jessica Utz, who is the president of the American Statistical Society, reviewed for the CIA, saying that, this is extremely replicable, like well beyond like other scientific fields as far as the p-values, the probabilities that you'd get hits on these sort of remote viewing targets. And so that seems like consciousness is this sort of really non-local thing, which again comports with quantum entanglement and the quantum stuff. So I don't think it's so crazy to say that you have phenomenologically all this evidence with remote viewing and the telepathy tapes, even though, in the telepathy tapes, in certain cases it's anecdotal, but I think it's pretty overwhelming. And then in the CIA case, it's actually statistically relevant with Jessica Utz, who's a total good faith actor and, seems very, very earnest. And then meanwhile, you have this kind of burgeoning field of quantum biology. And so I think we'll probably discover something around that somewhat soon. And I've spoken to Hal Puthoff about this. Do we have extended electrodynamical models that might, line up with consciousness? And he pointed me towards the work of Cleve Baxter, who, he talks about like plant communication. And so, I think he's, interested in this as well. Is there some sort of physicalist model of where we can eventually decode a carrier of thought itself? Because, another example, there are anecdotal examples of, you have like Lucille Ball, who had a filling in her tooth. This is in the telepathy tapes. And she's driving on some overpass and she starts to hear the radio in her head. And this is this is scientifically proven as well. It's called bone induction, where you have metal in the mouth could, pick up RF signals and you can, all of a sudden hear things. And I think Andrea Puerich had a similar case where it was like somebody working in a metal mill or whatever, it's a metallic ore got in his teeth, and all of a sudden he was being he's transmitting signals from elsewhere. So I think there's so much to discover in this area, and it's probably not traditional radio frequency, because if the consciousness is happening non-locally, if you are in a Faraday chamber, you shouldn't be able to think, given that, right? Because that's cutting out all RF signals. So like, yeah, presumably it's something else, and maybe it is this extended electrodynamical model that might explain thought. Who knows? I mean, it's super
Well, the
early
ability
innings.
to project thoughts, to transmit them out of your own head and into somebody else's head, and for them to be able to receive and perceive it is, I mean, something. There has to be a physics explanation for how non-human intelligence communicates with the humans that they encounter telepathically. I mean, I believe it happens, and there has to be a way to figure out how that happens.
Yeah. But do you have any hope for, if this is so beneficial to humanity, which I think both of us think it is if we let this stuff out, do you have any hope for the president disclosing this? And why hasn't, Trump already disclosed this? Because you have Donald Trump Jr. interviewing Ross Coulthart on the eve of his breaking of the Jake Barber story. So like what clearly like there's connectivity of there's people in the Trump admin who are very aware of this issue. I think Tim Waltz has spoken about David Grusch publicly and his revelations, and like is very interested, and I think Tulsi is very interested. She said she wants UAP transparency, and I've had a brief conversation with her around this topic as well.
Mhm.
She seems to know it's real, and but she wants to like put this stuff out, but it also feels like with a lot of these people, they have so many other priorities, and so yeah, what do you think happens?
I can't even hazard a guess, Jesse, because I don't have any connections into those circles, and I don't know what's being said. Privately, I don't have any idea. So I'm certainly hopeful, but I have no insight. I'm sorry to say.
No, it's okay. Well, any other things you want to touch on, or
I am interested in talking about what the mindset might have been for the Atomic Energy Commission and the intelligence community and the Defense Department.
can I tee you off and ask a quick question on
Yeah.
that? Okay, so why do you think this was made secret in the first place? It's just it should be kind of ontological truth, right? It should be basic kind of an understanding of whether we're alone in the universe should not be classified, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. But what I've thought about that, to the extent I've thought about it, Jesse, is I think like right after the war, the leadership in the country thinking back on the events of the previous couple of decades and probably felt that we were just exhausted. I mean, we'd been through 2 world wars, this long-lasting depression. We were entering into, we were already into a Cold War with the communist regime in Russia. And here we were, experiencing, having to deal with the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrial life and the like. And I can just so imagine the view that this would be another cataclysmic shock to society and the world order and the world's religions. We were barely, a decade removed from Orson Welles' War of the Worlds event. I think that was in 1938,
And that
and
literally touched off mass hysteria. It was this reading of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds by Orson Welles, famous auteur
yeah,
director,
yeah.
and people went nuts until they realized it was not real.
Well, that's right, but it was a lesson, right? That the leadership of the country could take and say, this can't be a good idea to let people know about this. And I guess I can also imagine that we wanted to figure out what it was all about before we would even ever consider letting this out. When Roswell allegedly happened, it took very little time for Washington to react. Like, what was it, Jesse Michels or whoever was the press person down at Roswell?
Marcel was the Air Force intelligence officer. Walter Haut, I believe, was
Haut was the public relations
public
guy.
relations. Colonel Blanchard was kind of dealing with Haut. And then who was it Ramey was the guy
General
from
Ramey
he was from Fort Worth.
Yeah, Fort Worth.
And he was like, guys, shut up. Don't put this out.
Well, and it didn't take long. Like, word went out that they had made this announcement back to Washington, and the order to shut the hell up and bottle this up came pretty quick. I've always been impressed by that. It sort of belies the lethargy of the bureaucracy, almost as if there had been some long-term awareness and a decision already made in Washington, like, this is bad news, and so wherever it pops up, you gotta react to it pretty quickly.
And Roswell was the site of the only American nuclear stockpile at the time.
That's right, and Bomber Force.
And Bomber Force.
Yes,
509th Atomic Bomber Squad.
Yeah, that's right. So I certainly think that there was a reason for this immediate reaction, but Jesse, on a sustained basis, the executive branch, if people like us are correct that they really have known and studied carefully this to the best of their ability, within bureaucratic constraints and budget constraints and so on, that they have accumulated a lot of information about this over the decades. And if, as some believe, if you just look at alleged UAP performance, there's some mighty interesting technology involved there. And if the government knows about that, but has chosen to keep it from being applied to solve, the pressing needs of the American people, and indeed society the world over, for travel, aerospace travel, for energy, and who knows what else. Why would the government have decided? And frankly, this is one of the criticisms of this view by skeptics is, look, if the military could fly, craft around like UFOs, do you think they would have squirreled it away so what if they have like 12 of them or something? We have thousands of F-35s and F-15s and F-16s. Why wouldn't we have applied this technology to our entire military force? Why are we still powering armored vehicles with diesel fuel and gasoline if we had the ability to take electrical power right from the physical vacuum?
Well, why haven't we used a hydrogen bomb yet?
Well, I mean, I think the hydrogen bomb predated our any mastery of this technology, but sure.
I'm just saying, we have all sorts of ace in the hole tech that we haven't allowed to be shown to the public for various.
Well, but the public knows about it, and we've applied it to our forces. In an observable, informed way.
Yeah.
Like everybody knows we've invested in hundreds of ICBMs and sea-based ballistic missiles and so on. So why would you limit this technology's reach if we actually had analyzed it and reversed engineered any of it? And it's a legitimate and difficult question to answer. I don't have an answer, but my own speculation is that I can think of a reason why the government might take that position, and the answer would be, a la our previous discussions about Nikola Tesla, T.T. Brown, and lots of others, is what if the government discovered that it's not that hard, after all, to access the physical vacuum and extract energy from it? And what if, that energy is extremely potent and can be weaponized?
Sure.
And what if it's not that hard to do that, and in fact doesn't even require mammoth engineering enterprises like our nuclear establishment requires? So that, a Kim Jong-un could be doing this in some warehouse someplace, right?
That'd be disastrous. And if that were the case, I would hope that there's some sort of strategic thinking around how to let some of this stuff partially out, or in a black boxed way, or in a way that, the Western forces control or whatever. And I would fully comply with that, because I don't want, Kim Jong-un to have
a beam weapon.
No,
that
I
can
don't.
vaporize New York City.
That might
something.
be where I deviate with the UFO circles. Is like, I don't want dictators that would literally, if they had the capabilities to destroy the U.S. By hitting a button, they would. And so, or use that as
some doomsday cult or something.
Yeah, or you trade Seoul for San Francisco with that. If you're talking about the Kim Jong-un thing. So some doomsday cult, or accelerationist want to bring about some eschatological apotheosis. I don't know. I'm with that.
So anyway, this is one possible explanation that I've thought of, where I could reconcile with observable facts. Of course, once again, I want to stress, because I'm sure my friends Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis and others, whoever watch this will be upset with me for even suggesting this, because they don't think that it's, or they say they don't think that it is possible. But what if it is? Then the government, but my problem with this, Jesse, is that even if they've got good reasons for doing what they did, in other words, if their intentions were noble, I just don't see that you can lock out the United States Congress. I mean, look, I came from Congress. I'm a career there. I'm an institutionalist. Congress, under our mode of government, has to be involved in managing this, in oversight of this, in resourcing it, and balancing interests and concerns. So, look, you don't have to reveal all this publicly, but you sure have to at least bring Congress in as a partner. And that's been my objective in this whole thing. I mean, my primary objective is to get this under a proper sort of constitutional framework.
Cool.
That's how I would answer your question.
Yeah. Well, Kirk McConnell, it's an honor to have you on. I really appreciate your time. This is a blast. And would love to have you back at some point. And thank you for everything you're doing. And I hope you are enjoying your time out of government.
Well, thank you very much. I do miss it, but I also don't miss it, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Okay. All right, man.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a real honor
it's an honor to
be
have
on
you.
your show.
I'm underqualified to interview you, so thank you.
Oh, hardly.
Awesome. What is up, Alchemist? If you're interested in joining group calls with me and accessing exclusive, never-before-seen episodes of American Alchemy, like my walk and talk with Danny Sheehan on who exactly killed JFK, or a remote viewing debate between Hal Puthoff and Eric Weinstein, then please join our WHOP community today. We've been sitting on a ton of unreleased footage that we will now be releasing on our new WHOP. I also hosted a discussion between the infamous Jack Sarfati and former American alchemist Science Bob McGuire. Head over to whop.com/Jesse Michels, Michels with no A, to become a member today.